Hi everyone. My name's Craig Pennington, CEO, co-founder at Future CIC. I've realised that I definitely need to get a press picture that isn't taken in our live room with our pink lights glowing through, because I've got some very, very questionable highlights going on there on my hair. So that's my takeaway for today. Jett, you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, my name's Jett Glozier. I'm the Head of Business Development and Cultural Infrastructure for a company called Sound Diplomacy.
Brill. So I think this is a bit of a fireside chat, was how it was sold to me. But without the fire, maybe we should roll the screen up, get the furnace on, and do it in front of the furnace. I think that would probably be the most appropriate way of doing it. But in absence of that, we'll crack on. So this is a conversation really about music, how music makes cities better. We're having this conversation here in Liverpool, a UNESCO Music City, UNESCO City of Music, and obviously a part of the world which is I think renowned globally for our music. One of the first things that I wanted to for us to talk about and to get your ideas on, Jett, really is about that as a starting point. Is about Liverpool, about this place, and how maybe the reality of the role that music plays in Liverpool, kind of how that sits alongside the international perception of what that might be. So maybe we start with that first, and then maybe I could share some thoughts afterwards. But from your point of view, obviously Sound Diplomacy works internationally, doing some absolutely fabulous work, I would say, and I'd encourage people that aren't familiar with Sound Diplomacy's work to definitely check them out. But thinking about Liverpool as a place, how do you think that is kind of perceived internationally, certainly as a music city, but also how, I suppose, well Liverpool is has leveraged its music kind of asset to bring about change, like the Liverpool model. How do you think that kind of lands nationally and internationally?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think we talk about this concept of music cities and cities of music, and I think lots of people are probably more and more familiar with that these days, probably somewhat to the work that we do and other places around the world. And I often, even myself, I'm a little bit skeptical of when places call themselves music cities, and actually wonder, well, are you just using that name to drive attention? I do generally think that Liverpool is one of the few who probably is actually a true music city. I don't think it's without its problems. All places, have its issues, etc. But I think Liverpool's reputation and the way it has prioritised music historically has given it a really good platform. I was on the train today, actually. However, I just want to give you sort of a juxtaposition of this. And there was two Americans, and they were over.
Okay.
And they were on the train, and they were like, "Oh, we're going to see Liverpool tonight over the weekend for the football." And I was like, "Oh, what else are you doing while you're here?" And they were like, "Well, we're going to go see, the Cavern and do all of that." And I was like, "Okay, cool." I was like, "How many places in the world could you go to, and instantly they would know something about the music that you've come from?" I don't think, other than maybe a Memphis or a Nashville, a Liverpool, or maybe a Manchester, maybe, sorry to say that as well, would you know some of the history? Even if it's a big tourist thing, there's not many places, that you would go to and say, I instantly recognise some of that music. And I think Liverpool's done a really good job of that. But then I always think, again, and this is where I sort of a question to you is, do the people of Liverpool, do you get a bit bored of people saying, we really know you for the Beatles, and you're like, particularly with what you do, is you have so much great talent, so many musicians here, so much other things, and there's a little bit too much focus on four guys who, were playing music 50, 60 years ago. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting, I suppose, challenge and opportunity. I mean, for me, I've made this comparison numerous times, but I kind of view the Beatles almost in a similar way to how I'd view the royal family, in the sense that it's like this amazing kind of opportunity to drive tourism, to drive kind of national and international brand recognition. So it's it's going to get bums on seats, it's going to get people off planes, it's going to really, really shine this kind of international kind of spotlight on our place. But the real challenge is and this is probably where the royal family analogy really falls apart, is how do you really use that to drive the future? How do you really use that as an opportunity and and a tool to drive what a music future looks like. And I think that Liverpool over the last 5 years has really started to do that very, very well. Certainly if you look at in the context of COVID and the challenges that presented, I mean, there's been some quite fundamental changes to the role that music plays in terms of its relationship with place, and certainly around policy over the last 5 years. I think where we are now with a Liverpool City Region Music Board and certainly a strategy and approach to how music is kind of understood and utilised within the city, that's very, very different to what it was 5 years ago. For instance, it's not really about music, but it shows the intersection is that the conversation about music has become much more embedded in kind of transport policy. So we've now got a night bus that runs cross river Friday and Saturday nights that we didn't have before. And it was the music board that was making that case from a music perspective, really. So I think it's better than it has been, but there's still, from my point of view, a long way to go.
Yeah, I'm glad that you can say that. So one of the places that we're working at the moment is Memphis, Tennessee. And when we first started there about 2 years ago, we were talking about Graceland, which is, arguably the US equivalent, right? Yeah. And they were saying how it didn't integrate with the city. And actually, Graceland, although it was bringing lots of people to Memphis, most of them were staying in Graceland and leaving and going to the rest of, that part of the world. And then when we started to speak to the city about, what great artists are from Memphis of recent times and how is that going, the city didn't really know.
Right.
And it worked out that their long-term vision for how to improve Memphis as a place around music, they were losing their edge, actually. And somewhat until the recent film, there was a decline in visitors for Elvis fans because, let's face it, it's an older demographic. So I just wondered about the comparison between Memphis and Liverpool, like what we're doing with Memphis, and they're probably a little bit behind you actually, is they're now realizing they need to invest in, the future Elvis and not rely on the one that's no longer here. And I think Liverpool, I hope, is doing that. And you can tell me that they are, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I mean, they definitely are. I think, are people in the room familiar with music futures? Just put your hand in the air if you've heard of music futures as a thing. Okay, that's quite encouraging. So Liverpool was recently selected Music Futures is a creative cluster project, so a national research project which has seen quite a large, just over £6 million, I think, worth of research funding, which has been awarded through the university as the primary organisation, with a whole network of partners involved with it. But the point that I'm making, just to answer, is that is very much focused on innovation and kind of, the future of the music sector, both in terms of artists, but also the businesses and the support networks and the skills and the training which will come together to create a thriving music ecosystem. Because I know that the ecosystem kind of perspective and kind of the economies around music is certainly something which is key to your work with sound diplomacy and the way that music can be used to drive economies. I mean, was that the Memphis kind of motivation, or is that because I know it's central to a lot of your work?
It's always central to how we work, but I just want to come back to what you've just said there about Liverpool as well and Memphis. Is although Liverpool and Memphis are great music cities now, that title is yours to lose as much as anything, and it's much easier to no longer be a music city because you failed to invest in the future. And I think that's where some cities around the world are struggling, actually, where they haven't reinvested in their ecosystem, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But that's the worry for me, for places like Liverpool or other cities where you rest on your laurels a little bit. You're like, well, we have this great asset, we don't really need to do anything else.
Yeah, it's when it just principally is not actually a music strategy. That is where the royal family analogy is useful, that it's actually about tourism. It's actually about tourism and heritage. It's not really about music. And I think that's the key challenge, is making sure that the focus and the emphasis is on the here and now, is on the ecologies that kind of create these amazingly successful pieces of IP. I mean, the Beatles were one of the most successful pieces of IP that have come out of a really, really creative ecosystem. We need to make sure that we've got the next one and the next one and the next one, and drive forward that dynamism that you're talking about.
Yeah, and then to your point about what is an ecosystem and how this all works, some people will know this, and some people might not. But when people think about music, often you think about the artist on stage. That's your biggest interaction with music. You go to a gig, you see that artist on stage, or maybe you just listen to an artist on Spotify, which is what most of us are doing on the bus and the train every day. But what people fail to really see is past that there's a whole ecosystem of people, businesses, skills that went into putting those artists on stage or getting that, that song on your headphones on your phone. And how music can support and create great cities is by supporting an ecosystem, right? So that's all the production companies, that's the grassroots venues as well as the big venues. That's having places for creative businesses to work, like this area as well, which can support managers and labels. And without an entire ecosystem, there's not a healthy music industry. And therefore, I would say there's without a healthy music ecosystem, there's not really a healthy city as well. Yeah. Those two things often reflect each other quite well. So yeah, I think that's food for thought there on that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think at the heart of that as well, which you've spoken to, is the idea of collaboration. And I know that collaboration is obviously one of the key themes of the event today. This is something that I think has been a point of friction and also a point of opportunity, certainly in a Liverpool context over the years that I've been involved in music in the city. And it's that relationship between the local authority and the private sector, and whose responsibility it is and who has the ownership to kind of drive forward that change. Maybe if we start with some of the reflections, because there's been a heap of projects internationally that Sound Diplomacy has led on and been involved with, and I think that kind of intersection between the public and the private kind of sector they're inherent, I would imagine, in most of them. Maybe when have you seen that done really, really well? What do you think are the kind of the lessons to be learned from when that's been done well?
Yeah, I can certainly answer that. I just want to flag what one of the gentlemen in the last panel said, it really, really resonated with me. He said something about the difference between participation and collaboration. And that really struck a chord with me about how sometimes people are asked to participate, but then that's about it. And the same thing happens, with the work that we do in both public and private sectors as well, that unless people, and I think the word that was missing was maybe empowerment, unless people have the actual power to affect change, then, their collaboration or their stakeholder engagement is just a box-ticking exercise. So, sorry, I just wanted to say that while you were thinking about it. I thought it was quite interesting what he said. So the push and pull of private sector, public sector is certainly not unique to the UK or anywhere else in the world. We just have slightly different ways of handling it. I think, ultimately you have to understand that public sector is more than likely voted in, so they need to keep people happy, so they get more votes. You always think about that, whereas the private sector is fundamentally profit-driven, shareholder-driven, etc. So they have to make a return on investment. Where we have to think about collaboration is understanding how both of those two relationships work. So we have to understand that not everything can be fully non-for-profit, not everything can be charity-focused, and likewise, not everything can be entirely commercially driven. Some things have to do a bit of both, some do more of one side, some do more than the other. But where successful cities are made is where they strike a bit of a balance between those two things and understanding how each of those partners work. So ultimately, what I would like to see more of in this country, but I think it's an issue for larger government problem really, is more ownership from the councils to take this. I think Liverpool does a really good job of it. Unfortunately, lots of other boroughs and councils around the UK really struggle with fighting back or pushing back on the private sector, and saying no, we need a little bit more, community value, social value to come from this. We don't need to just have that direct cost of selling flats, etc. And I think that's where that push and pull could come from a little bit more. Where have we seen this work really well? Cardiff does actually a really good job of it. Cardiff has a music board, like Liverpool does. And what I really like about there is if a new planning permission comes in through planning and it's in any way can impact an existing music venue, they get to put their hands up and say, actually, no, we want to have a comment on this. The noise from our venue could impact those flats, etc., or vice versa. And they have a direct seat at the table with the planning department. You know, it's an official board within the city government, etc. And that does really, really well. The other place I'll talk about is a place called Huntsville, Alabama, where we've worked quite a lot. And again, they've seen this big trade-off between private investment into houses and, you know, flats and, you know, you name it, or apartments, as we call them there, everything else. But what they've done quite well in Huntsville is, again, they set up a music office. So they have an official department within the city of Huntsville where someone's sole job it is to understand how the music industry works in that city. And again, they have an elected music board. And again, these conversations, they don't just have a seat at the table. They're actually empowered to say yes or no to things. But likewise, it's done with an understanding that the music industry is an economic driver as well, so it has a right to be an economy in its own, right? Yeah. So in itself, it is allowed to have some power and, you know, fight off against the automobile industry or whatever else is going on, and make sure that they have an equal seat at the table and they're invested in as well. So those places, you know, very briefly, Cardiff and Huntsville, although miles and miles apart, are doing similar things in a similar way, and it's just about having the right seat at the table and the power to actually impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And Huntsville is a really, really interesting example. I know one of your colleagues, Shane, recently released a book. This must be the place, which Correct. Talks about that work quite a lot. So, I think a piece of further reading there for those who are interested. I just want to pick up on one word that you used there and draw a line through from the previous panel. You mentioned ownership, and I think it was Kirsten mentioned around ownership of physical assets when we were talking about placemaking in the previous panel. And I think that comes and draws down a really, really interesting kind of space where the relationship between the private sector and the public sector and that kind of placemaking and planning kind of debate becomes really, really interesting because, you know, we're sat here in the Baltic Triangle. I think the Baltic Triangle is a really interesting example of a phenomenon which has happened all around the world where particularly music venues have been really, really key in kind of reimagining what a part of a city might be, you know, reimagining what a neighborhood might be, you know, being the real kind of driver behind kind of changing perceptions of why people might want to go there, might want to live there, might want to hang out there, bringing up the property prices, instigating this change. But then as soon as that change happens, certainly in this part of the city, those organisations are often the first to get kicked out to make way for the new money, the property development, and those kind of things. I think what we've tried to do very, very deliberately in Birkenhead is create a model whereby that doesn't happen. And organisations like Future Yard, like Make, are there as permanent custodians who are anchored within the community, own their assets, so that as that place changes and it evolves and it grows, the original reasons that people wanted to be there in the first place are part of that long-term future. We've definitely kind of structured our organisation as a direct kind of counterbalance to the idea of kind of gentrification being this universal kind of God-given truth. I don't think is actually a universal God-given truth.
I've got a little anecdote exactly about that. Okay. So when I was in my mid-20s, I built this nightclub called Oval Space. It did really well. It was 1,000 capacity. It had a really good reputation, got a lot of international artists around it. And we had a private landlord. We didn't have a very good lease deal. And they came in after 5 years and said, God, you guys are doing really well. We're going to double your rent. And we're like, oh, okay, this is close to putting us out of business. Yeah, well, we've actually bought loads of the properties around you. We're going to double your rent because really we kind of want to get rid of you, right, eventually. And then they started building these like office spaces around us, and they sent us their marketing deck. And they said, come live in this neighbourhood, come work in this neighbourhood, it's so good, we've got this bakery, and we've got this amazing venue called Oval Space that you could go to. And we're like, you're literally kicking us out and doubling our rent, but yet you're using us as marketing collateral for how we've made the area amazing. It was a really dodgy part of Bethnal Green that was full of burnt out cars when we moved in there. You know, we did all the hard work, and now you're doubling our rent and, you know, taking off the good things. And when I arrived here, this space looks really like my venue, actually, that I used to own. And the first thing I said to someone from the Baltic Creative, I was like, oh, are you under pressure from developers? This looks like the sort of place where they would, because I didn't know the history, I'm sorry. And she said, no, we've established the way that we work is that, you know, we're not really, in a way, you know, we're embedded in the area and we can have a bit of a say. And I was like, oh, yeah, if only I had that idea 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been, obviously, this place maintains itself, and there's ownership here that owns the bricks and mortar, but I think that, you know, if you look at the experience in other parts of Liverpool, certainly Wolstenholme Square and the Casimir Nation, what that's become now and the changes, I mean, it's a you know, night and day in Manchester, that whole kind of like continually told tale. I think that idea of kind of physical infrastructure is, though, really, really interesting, because, you know, we've spoken here about some examples of when venues that would have been a reason for a place changing and not necessarily part of the future vision. But then on the flip side, often one of the first things that local authorities want to do is invest in capital infrastructure and build venues. I'm just thinking about maybe some examples again of where, through the work that Sound Diplomacy does, you've seen that done really, really, really well, and maybe some observations in places where that hasn't worked particularly well.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think, due to the work that, you know, people in this room and yourself have done, I think the benefits of having music venues, by the way, started to be a little bit more globally recognised of how it can uplift neighbourhoods, and it produces, you know, social value, etc. It's not just about a place to drink. You know, I think people have started to recognise the community value. So we've seen both private developers and councils in the country come to us and say, we now want a music venue. And again, when I think about my past life, when I was constantly under threat from the councillors and developers, I'm like, oh my gosh, things have really changed, and people now want us to do this. And again, so I think there's, I talk about a place where I don't think it's particularly worked it's really on the private developer side of things, where they want a music venue, but really they just want you to take a space that's failed for them previously. They're like, oh, we really want a music venue. Can you take this old ground floor unit that was going to be a Tesco Express and we now can't find anyone to do anything for, and can you make it really cool and vibrant? And everyone's like, no, it's too late. Like, what are you trying to achieve from that? And then you have, you know, good places. And I'll come back to Huntsville, actually, because it's in my mind, when they were really strategic and intentional about what was the right thing. So full market assessments were taken out. What's the demand? What's the capacity? You know, what type of green room should they have for artists? How can they make it an artist-first experience rather than it being a place where it was a failed retail shop and we're just horseshoeing in the creatives to make it work for us? You know, this place in Huntsville, it's called the Orion Amphitheatre. We had Snoop Dogg play there the other day, Lana Del Rey, you know, all these amazing tours. And really, it's because we understood what the place needed and what it was capable for. And then in comparison to that venue that I won't talk about is still an empty shop that doesn't have a Tesco Express in it. Because it just wasn't thought about. So we say, you know, if you want to build culture, you have to build it in rather than bolt it on. If you try and do it after as an afterthought, it's never going to work.
I think we've spoken a bit about the kind of the economic drivers around music, and we obviously, I suppose because of the nature of the conversation we're having, talk a lot about live music there in cities and places. And obviously Liverpool, there's been some brilliant work done, you know, over the last, certainly since 2008, looking at the economic drivers of culture more broadly and mass participation public events. And I think we understand the economic impact in terms of bed nights and kind of like spend per head and the real kind of, you know, rich economic opportunity that presents. But an area maybe that doesn't have the same emphasis and is definitely kind of at the heart of our work as a non-profit community interest company is social value. So, you know, for those of you who maybe aren't aware, when we established Future Yard, we're on Argyle Street in the middle of Birkenhead, and we were very, very deliberate about our location So we're located in an area of real, quite acute social deprivation. There's a lot of challenge there. When you look at indices of multiple deprivation, which is a government measure for the cumulative impacts of poverty, it is one of the most challenged communities in the country. And what we were keen to do is make sure that the positive social benefits that an organisation like ours can bring about, so access to skills and training, the interpersonal kind of mental health enrichments of our programmes, thinking about the way that we can work with emerging artists to help them create sustainable long-term careers. We'll focus in that work and that social value in a part of the world that really, really, really needs it. Do you see that kind of social approach and trying to understand the impact of the work that's done in the places that you guys have a presence being understood through the social value as well as the economics?
Yeah, we as an organisation have spent a lot of time the last couple of years trying to work out how to measure, articulate, just understand what the social community value is that comes from music. So that's music venues and music education and all of these things. The main reason is we've worked out that to get people to do things, we need to go from people understanding that music's a nice to have to actually it's a need to have, and that by having it and investing in it, it can create greater value than what people realise. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with, but there's a term in investing called ESG investment, which stands for environmental, social and governance. And essentially, most investments nowadays are ESG conscious. So people are wanting to invest in things that are better. We don't really want to invest in weapons and oil so much anymore. Yeah. And what we've worked out is that music and culture can provide high social value, so it can tick these ESG criteria, and therefore we can get more people to invest in it going forward. So that's what we've started to work out, and what we're trying to now do is how to help organisations, even such as yourselves, measure and articulate your social value so people can more understand that they need to invest in this, they need to understand it, rather than it just, those nice guys wearing, cool shirts on stage, doing their thing. Those are the artists. They actually provide value. The social value that you're talking about, I think is really important, and people underappreciate that the music industry, it's called an industry, and actually it provides loads of skills. So, I'm sure you'll know this better than anyone, but the skills you can learn from running a venue or putting on your first show, these are transferable skills to business, and you're providing, I think you do a great job, by the way, mate. I'm a big fan. I've said this before, I'm a really big fan of Future Yard. Providing skills and opportunities to access for people, these are things that, other industries actually don't do as well as the music industry does in certain times. And we've proven time and time again that access in arts and culture is great for wellness, which, we've all seen how we need to look after our mental health, etc., post-COVID, and music, and we've seen so many benefits that we're only now really starting to be able to articulate, rather than just saying, we kind of always knew they were there.
Yeah. No, it's so true. So I think we're going to have an opportunity to come to the floor for some questions in just a second. So if people could ponder on what they may be and pop your hand in the air, just while we're kind of ruminating on that. Just one other question for you, Jett. In the last session, there was a comment around consultation and how kind of consultation, when it's done kind of with really, really authentically and really, really engages communities, can create richer, more sustainable, long-term projects and communities as a result of it. Thinking about a town or a city investing in a new arena or a large-scale kind of development like that, how, obviously it's important, but how have you seen that done well, so that resource responds to the needs of the community and really, really kind of, is going to work as an asset for that community?
Yeah, well, without giving sort of specific example necessarily, I think, again, stakeholder engagement is really, really key. We all know about it. We do lots and lots of focus groups and surveys all around the world, and I think they're really good. But I just want to come back to what that guy said about participation versus collaboration. Yeah. And you know what? It's really, really stuck with me. I'm going to take this away, because I even think as my organisation, we are probably at fault of this too, is we do these reports, we do stakeholder engagement, we hand in the report, we hand in the work, and then the communities are sort of forgotten about. And I think we all need to build in ways, or I'm thinking about this in my organisation and the cities of Liverpool and whoever else, is how you constantly engage or go back. You know, how do you monitor and check what's being done, as someone said, and make sure the right things are being done? Because it's all well and good saying, hey, you know, what do you think about this arena? And we go, oh, you know, can you give us some money for the local grassroots venue as well? And they say yes. Often the accountability disappears once the decision's been made. And now I'm starting to think about, okay, how can we make sure that there's constant accountability every year, every 5 years, however that is? And that's, I don't know, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, but that guy really triggered me with something. So I'm really thinking about it. And I think that's something for maybe take away is, when we do these like placemaking initiatives, it's definitely not enough to just engage people and say, thanks for all your input. We might do some of that. I think there needs to be more accountability. So I'm going to take this away with me.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's nothing worse than kind of like a place being left with a great strategy that makes loads of sense, but then no ongoing rich kind of like engagement with the local community who really should be the custodians to drive that forward. I think that was always the key with us with Future Yard, was like, how do you actually engage a community and empower and enable community to take hold of an asset and then maintain it and make it sustainable?
Yeah, and I think the problem with a lot of the big infrastructures, like maybe arenas, for example, is they come into a community and they have a massive impact, but ultimately the decisions and the ownership exists somewhere else. Yeah. Most of the arenas in the UK are owned by, you know, a company from Canada. We won't say who they are. So unless there's that continuous engagement with them, your community that you live in, you become a bit powerless to say anything to them and continuously engage with them. So I do think we need to think about ways in which, when these big mega projects come to town, how does the community continuously have equal rights to say how it impacts them?